Thank you so much, Claire O'Rourke, for being part of our event tonight. It's so wonderful to have you along.
Thanks for having me. It's so exciting that you've got this event with all these fantastic speakers happening. So I'm just very grateful to be part of it.
So I've got a couple of questions for you tonight. First of all, I'd love to ask you a little bit about yourself and why you care so much about taking action on climate change.
Mm. Yeah, well, I live on Dharawal country, which is, Wollongong, just south of Sydney. So I'm very privileged to live in a place called Ostermere, which is surrounded by, on the one side, by incredible Illawarra escarpment rainforest that's just literally almost out my back door. And then we're also quite close to the beach. So we're about a 10-minute walk from a range of beautiful beaches that stretch down the northern Illawarra coast. So I think I've worked in social justice and advocacy on a range of issues over the last kind of 15, 20 years. So I was a journalist first, but I worked on disability and, press freedom rights and human rights and, workers' rights, a whole range of different issues. But this is kind of a funny story, but the Throwdown Challenge actually came from me when I got an email from GetUp that was one of these member surveys that says, tell us what you care about. And I looked at the list and I thought, this is silly. I'm going to tick all the boxes because I care about all of these things. But it made me take a second look. And the big thing that landed for me was that if we don't have a healthy environment, we don't have any progress on any of the other things, because all of these issues are, intersectional, to use a complicated word, but it's like everything is connected. And, at the baseline, if our environment is unhealthy, we're unhealthy. And, that was when that email, thank you, GetUp, landed when my children were still reasonably young. They're, teenagers now and, getting towards the end of high school. And, thinking about what the future holds for them was really landing for me at that time. So, there's obviously self-interest, which I think we all share, about wanting to protect your family and, making sure, they're healthy and well-fed and well cared for, not just by you, but by society and by the environment, but also about those systemic issues that I have worked on and care deeply about. So that's kind of where it comes from for me.
That makes perfect sense. You've got a new book out, Together We Can. Tell us about it.
Oh, well, this book actually came as a result of my own little climate freakout moment. And I'm sure lots of people watching have had one, two, or several climate freakout moments. I was already back working in the climate movement full time, in work to transition the energy sector. When the Black Summer fires hit, we experienced, like many of your members and supporters will have experienced, that kind of acrid yellow smoke in the sky. Down here on Dharawal country, we had thousands and thousands of flying foxes, so like bats, coming in at dusk, and they just had never appeared in our environment before. So it was this kind of oppressive, checking the air quality apps, looking at these skies, seeing the kind of the bats coming. It was like end of days
Whoa.
kind of stuff. And we did. Yeah, it was really confronting. Particularly, acknowledging that I live in a privileged place and I have lots of opportunity, and I live in this kind of suburban feeling kind of place. It's beautiful, but it's suburban. And it just felt really weird to be packing up our house, thinking about we might have to evacuate because there's lots of trees, and there was a lot of concern from our local fire authorities that we would have to leave. Didn't have to in the end, but that impacted on me, impacted on my family, just the kind of trauma of that, like it did for so many Australians. We lost so many lives and animals and plants, and about a fifth of our eastern forests burned in those fires. So after the fires and when the pandemic started rolling in, we embarked on a project at the Sunrise Project called Climate Compass. And that was a study of Australian attitudes on climate change. And that study surfaced a group that we actually called the Alarmed, which was about 24% of Australians, so close to 5 million people, were pretty well as worried about climate change as I was. And, there are significant studies that have been done in recent years in Australia and overseas that talk about these incredible levels of climate distress, which is a rational reaction to the state of the world. So if you're feeling that way, don't worry. Lots of people are feeling the same way as you. And it's also something that we need to face. So I was reflecting on that and did a bunch of personal work on that I write about in the book, kind of processing those kind of feelings of grief and sadness and anxiety and uncertainty. And at the same time, was really noticing the lack of good news stories. And I'm in a very privileged position in my work that I see lots of terrific things and developments that are happening across the energy sector, lots of wonderful work that's being done in advocacy particularly. But I wanted to look a little bit beyond that. And once I started surfacing stories, there were so many examples of really great work that's being done across all sectors, in all parts of the country, that it just filled a book really easily.
Thank you. I had a similar experience to you during those fires when the smoke crisis rolled out in Melbourne. I was heavily pregnant with my daughter Pip, and I've had many doctors say to me since that breathing the air as a pregnant woman during that time wasn't safe for my baby inside me. And it's just such a worrying thing to have to think about as a parent these days. It's shocking. And I loved hearing about some of the stories of hope. Are there any standout stories that you wanted to share with folks tonight?
Oh, there's so many, so many. The story that I'm sure Suzanne Mungle is watching this broadcast, and she's a Climate for Change volunteer, conversation host, and just amazing person, wonder of a person. I was so fortunate to be introduced to Suzanne, but she kind of went through an incredible change, and I don't want to speak for her because she's probably watching and she'll want to talk about it herself, but she went through a kind of recasting of her life around climate and was called to action by essentially the pointy end was by Greta Thunberg when she made her speech to the UN a few years ago, where she said, "How dare you?" And she's told me that Greta was speaking to her. And so now she's doing all these amazing things, like hosting loads of climate conversations as part of Climate for Change, but also, hosting an Ordinary Eco Mums Facebook group. She's from Kingaroy in Queensland, which I didn't really expect to find a lot of climate activists in Kingaroy. It's the peanut capital of Australia. But she's now lobbying the Upper Burnett Council, with others. It's just incredible to see what one person can start when they make the decision that they're really sick of what's going on and they want to do something about it. And I think what's also really interesting about her story is that Suzanne, she's a great connector and networker. And one of the messages and some of the research that I talk about in the book is how, if you want to spread information, yeah, celebrities are helpful, people who have big profile and lots of notoriety. But if you really want to spread behavior change and see the kind of change that we're going to need on the kind of incredible social scale that we have, we're going to have to leverage all of our networks. Ordinary people can be most influential when it comes to behavior change. So if people are thinking that there's not really much they can do or they don't have a lot of resources, one of the big messages from the book is consider your networks, because you'll be probably very surprised at who's in them and, who's also worried.
So inspiring. I personally found it really hopeful to read the stories in your book. If others want to read more about it, how can they get their hands on a copy?
Well, you can order it through my website, which is just my name, claireo'rourke.com. You can find it in all independent bookstores. I'm told Big W is also stocking it in some stores, which is great. Let's get the message out enormously. But also through Booktopia or Amazon, you can buy ebook copies as well if you don't want to purchase the paper version, which a lot of folks want to, save the paper. So go for that.
Cool.
I thought I'd just show this amazing little thing from the Knitting Nanas Illawarra group that they knitted for me. Hope never quits.
So beautiful.
How gorgeous is that? So I think that's always the big thing with climate action. It's not what can I do, but it's what will I do now and what will I do next, because everyone's on their own climate journey.
What a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Claire. Really appreciate it. Thanks for
having me. Thanks for having me along.